All right, friends, I am so excited for who you get to meet today. I'm sitting here with my new friend, Dr. Morgan Cope. Morgan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
Can you tell us who you are, what you do, and a fun fact about yourself?
Yes, I'm Morgan. I am a relationship scientist and an assistant professor of psychology at Center College here in Danville, Kentucky. I do research on romantic relationships and identity. And when I'm not doing that, I teach classes. I teach classes in psychology on sexuality, social psychology, and statistics. And a fun fact about me is that I was a competitive gymnast for about 13 years growing up. So I had a very kind of an intense childhood, but that has really been formative for my identity.
Wow. That's what was your main event? Is that
Well,
the
we had
right
to
way to
do
ask
all
that?
four. Yeah, we had to do all four. Bars was my favorite because I'm about 5'8", so I'm pretty tall, which is unusual for gymnasts. But bars was my favorite for sure.
That is, bars, I feel like is the hardest for me to watch because I'm like,
yeah.
You're just waiting for someone to the stakes are so high if someone accidentally lets go.
You're waiting for someone to eat it on bars and on beam are the most nerve-wracking. But
yes, it's nerve-wracking for everyone watching. Well, that's amazing. That is a fantastic fun fact. I love knowing that about you.
Thank you.
I also love knowing that you're tall because I'm also tall. I'm like 5'9". And
we're out here.
That people may actually not know that about me because the internet's so weird. You just see chest up. So yeah. Tall girls unite. Yeah. Well, okay. I am so excited to ask you 1,000 questions about what you've learned about relationships because this is an angle that we've never taken before. I want to first ask you, how did you start doing this? How did you become a person who researches relationships, and particularly romantic relationships and breakups? What sent you down that path?
Yeah, it's one of those topics that I didn't know you could even study scientifically until I went to college myself. I went to undergrad near Philadelphia and started out as a psychology major. I was pretty sure in that, but I was really into forensic psychology. I'd watched Criminal Minds. I had watched Mariska Hargitay be super sexy, doing her thing on Law and Order. And I was like, that looks like fun. But then I became kind of disillusioned with the legal process and the system. And so I was sort of flirting around in a personal purgatory for a while, which is what you do when you're 19, and that's fine.
Yes,
but I was then, by accident, put in a senior seminar on relationship science. There was a faculty member, Brent Mattingly, who was doing this upper level senior seminar class on relationships. And we would read journal articles every class. We'd come in and talk about it. And so I just happened to be put there. And it was the first time in my life I had truly seen someone think critically about a topic that was important to every single person I knew. And I thought that was just the best. And it was a revelation for me. And so I wanted to be able to think like he thought. And like all critical thinkers do, where you're just making discoveries about yourself and the world around you, but in a way that is based in method and science and things that are tangible. So I became more interested in his research lab. I ended up joining that lab. And I was really interested in attachment for a while. This has kind of risen to social consciousness, attachment theory, anxious attachment, avoidant attachment, our expectations for other people.
Yep.
But towards graduation, I knew I was going to move to Florida and get my PhD and go to grad school and make this big transition. And I had a partner at the time. And I was really ruminating on whether or not to take them with me. That was a huge point of contention for me. I was very stressed. And so one day I did break up with them in my last year of college. I broke up with them. And that day, we'd been together for about 2 years, I felt destroyed in a way that I had never before. I didn't know what to do or where to walk on campus. I was crying in the dining hall, and I'm just I don't cry. It's good to emote, obviously, but I'm not a huge crier. And I was just I didn't know how to do these low level behaviors now that I knew I wasn't in that relationship. And I went back to my dorm that night and I said, if it feels this bad, it must have been the wrong decision. So just that night, I called up this person. I was like, so I've changed my mind. Do you want to come to Florida with me? And they moved with me to Florida and I rekindled that relationship. And then I was unhappy and living with someone that ultimately I did not end up staying with for about a year during COVID. A lot of just, this person is fabulous and, I loved them and it was great, but I got myself in a situation that I shouldn't have. And it was because I had felt so awful and I wasn't willing to kind of explore why. I was looking for a quick resolution to my pain. And I think that breakup experience was very informative of why I chose to ultimately make this my line of research. And that's sort of how I ended up on this identity recovery, doing things in relationships and in breakups that while we might think that it's about our partner or about our relationship, it's in fact about us a lot of the time.
I love this so much for so many reasons. One of them is I love the reminder that there are little breadcrumbs all the time happening in our lives. And I think a lot of times, for anyone who's kind of a second guesser, we're like, well, I really like this, but that must not mean anything, or whatever. Yeah. A lot of people like this. And something that I remind myself and, anyone who will listen as often as I can is like, if you are into something, pay attention to that because not everyone is taking this kind of class at this college and feeling their heart beat faster at these studies and articles and stuff that they're reading. Like if something is making your heart beat, pay attention to that. So I love that reminder. And then also, my life has been totally changed. I have been totally changed by relationships, but especially breakups. And I feel like those are fork in the road moments where it's like, who am I going to be? And is this going to be the moment that destroys me? Or is this going to be a moment that helps me become the next, takes off a Russian doll and gets the outside and helps me get closer to who I really am. And so breakups are, in hindsight, some of my favorite moments of my life, partially because they were some of the most painful and they changed me so much. And so, but I have no idea what's actually happening for real life underneath those feelings. So I want to know, starting with relationships, how do relationships change us? Scientifically or psychologically, or what's actually happening below the idea that we're like, oh, well, yeah, of course I changed a little in this relationship.
Absolutely. So when we get into relationships, when we initiate them and begin to maintain them, we start to include our partner in our sense of self. So in my research and in our field, we deal with the self concept a lot, which is just your traits, your values, your characteristics. Usually it's represented, by a circle. And you can think of this circle as being able to expand and contract, and we can add new identities, take ones away that don't serve us. But when we get into relationships, we're actually integrating someone else's circle into our own. So it's kind of these concentric Venn diagram looking things. And that's when you go from I and me to the emergent we. You're no longer just the individual, you're this cohesive unit, you can be a team if that's a helpful framework. And that shift is towards interdependence. Your goals and motivations may be reliant on one another, or you're coordinating plans, anything from what to eat to dinner to where you want to live in 5 years. And when we do that fosters intimacy, but it also promotes similarity. And we can integrate, and ultimately we tend to become more similar over time because we go through self-change processes. And again, my very first research advisor, Dr. Brent Mattingly, has this theory. It's the two-dimensional model of self-change. Because on one dimension, you have your adding and subtracting elements from your identity. And on the other dimension, you have positive and negative content. So essentially, you can get better or worse, right? Closer or further away from your ideal self by adding or taking away traits, characteristics, and values. So if you're adding good identities, things that you enjoy. Maybe you start hiking with a partner or you go to concerts with them. And we call this self-expansion. And we do this in all sorts of domains in our lives, hobbies, work, whatever. But relationships are a really big part of that as well. If you are taking away bad elements of yourself, if you're like, well, my partner helps me be less anxious, or I don't procrastinate as much on the dishes when they're around, that is self-pruning. So you can kind of imagine this like bushy shrub that you're slowly kind of molding into the shape you want. It's also called the Michelangelo effect, which I think is kind of cute. And then,
why is it called that? I have to pause.
Social psychologists, we do this. We just like make up words for things because Michelangelo is, I don't know, he's a painter, but also there's something about sculpting, and it's an art of becoming the self and transforming into the shape and person you want to be.
Okay.
It's a little cheese ball, but
I love it.
Yeah. And then so those are the improvement processes, right? You're improving the self, approaching your ideal self. It can go the other way though. And sometimes it does, right? Where if you lose positive content, we call it self-contraction. So your self is getting smaller and smaller. Maybe you stop listening to your favorite band, or you don't go running anymore, losing these parts of yourself. And that can be really painful, especially if you have high self-esteem and prioritize autonomy. And then the other direction, if you're taking on negative identities, say it has to be perceived as bad for it to count, right? So if you don't want to be a smoker, but you end up smoking because your partner does, that could be something that you're taking on. And so it's just a very dynamic flow of becoming increasingly similar to people and shifting from this individual to a unit that has to coordinate. In order to coordinate, we need to synchronize and be at least a little bit similar. Like opposites can attract, but it can create some tension. So over time, we become more similar.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Is there something about like falling in love with someone or caring about someone that changes our sense of identity? Or is it mostly like, I don't know, when couples have been together forever, you're like, you guys are starting to look like each other. Are you like kind of like, yes. Is that a thing?
That happens because of facial mimicry. So if you're with a really old couple that looks pretty similar, usually if someone smiles at you, you smile back because we're very reciprocal as humans. So, but if they frown, you frown and you sad. And so over time, you will develop more similar facial lines to your partner than you will a stranger who is your same age. So you can actually like physically start to look more similar to your partner, which is kind of cute.
That's so wild. I thought that was like just everyone's imagination and like the matching tracksuits that, everyone's wearing.
Also, you're eating the same food and you're living in the same socioeconomic status. Those things matter as well.
Wow. Okay, so is it that you are like living in the same? Is it that you're spending so much time together that you're taking on traits and losing traits according to what the other person's doing, or like is it just that, or is there also something that happens in us when we're like, wow, I met someone, I really care about them? Does that change who we are? Also, like, do you have to actually be in a relationship with someone, or can it just be like, does it have to be official for it to change you? Is mostly the question.
That probably depends on the person, actually. So I mentioned attachment earlier, and I will explain and then bring it back to anxious attachment and changing when you're high in anxious attachment. So attachment is usually considered on 2 dimensions. You can be high and low in both. High attachment anxiety would be desiring to be really, really close with other people, not feeling like you can quite regulate on your own. And it comes from having an inconsistent caregiver, someone who was there sometimes, but not others. So you're really hyper vigilant, like, oh, is someone going to be there for me? I really want people to be close. But then on the other dimension is avoidance. So someone who had an absent caregiver as a child may develop these hyper independent tendencies to where it feels very uncomfortable and itchy to be close to others and have their goals intertwined with others. And if you're high in attachment anxiety, this can make you spontaneously acquire other people's identities to foster closeness. So if you are, you're an anxious person, you really want to be with someone, maybe you're not, you might say you like the music that they like, or kind of change your look to be something that that is appealing to them. to foster an attraction. So to that end, we can change ourselves. We change ourselves for other people all the time. It's kind of a human thing. We want to be liked, and that's totally understandable. We want to be accepted. But also when you're in an official relationship, you are motivated to foster that similarity and that cohesion. So it might be happening more in an official relationship as a way to stay together and keep the relationship good, or make you feel satisfied and make your partner feel satisfied. But I think it could also happen if you were not necessarily officially with that person.
Yeah. Okay. So how does this, like, my mind is immediately going to, oh my gosh, if we are going to become more like the person that we are with, this puts extra pressure on the dating process, because something that I've been thinking about a lot in the last 4 years or so when it comes to dating, because that's something we talk about a lot, here in my corner of the internet. And I became a mom 4 years ago. And so I've been seeing my partner in a whole different set of circumstances. I'm like just very grateful. I always thought that he would be a fantastic dad, but he's even better than I even could have imagined, because I had no idea what having kids was going to be like. He's a fantastic dad. And I'm so grateful, because I'm like, what if I didn't marry someone who would be a good parent or a good partner in this thing that's super hard? And so, like, from my perspective today, I'm looking at people dating going, don't date somebody that, or don't like get into a serious relationship with someone that you can't trust to pick your kid up from school. Because you're not only picking a partner, you're picking a parent for your future kids if you have them. But this is like an extra wrinkle to that, is like, not only are you picking someone you're going to partner for your whole life with and the parent of your future kids, but you're picking like kind of who you're going to become by who you attach yourself with. That's correct, right?
I think that's a good point. And I feel like that feels correct. And what do I want to say here? Parent is especially tricky, right? Because you're becoming legally, and marriage, if you want to engage in a legal contract with a relationship and you want to produce children, that person you're going to be legally connected to them. So you want them to have good outcomes. But then also you're selecting into almost like a genetic contract if you're having kids. But the thing is, you don't always know what's going to make you happy until you experience different types of people. Some people imagine, like we watch movies growing up that shows us what we're supposed to want someone to be like. Someone who's really, if you're in a straight relationship, really big and masculine, and they're gonna come in and protect, and that can be really, provide you with a sense of security if it's your thing. But what we might need is someone who listens to you and makes you feel heard. And sometimes that doesn't all come in one package. So I think that, yes, you want to understand that we are who we surround ourselves with in and outside of relationships. It's your family, it's your friends, your communities. So I think that's a good thing to keep in mind. But we don't want to restrict ourselves if we're just, I'm only willing to engage my time with people that are like this because I don't want to become someone I'm not. You might be cutting yourself off from some self-expanding opportunities to experience different types of people.
That's really cool. So, like, that's a really good point. I'm glad you said that, because I was picturing more like staying with someone. Like, if you start dating someone and then you're like, it's good enough. Like, it's okay,
Oh, tragic.
Like,
no.
like, yeah, it's okay. Like, I
Is it?
Right. And it's like that's you're going to become more like them the more time you spend with this person. Is that who you want to become?
Mm-hmm.
And those are things that you just don't know right off the bat. So I'm really glad you said that.
And people change. Change is inevitable regardless. So especially if you have life milestones, if you choose to become a parent or you have a job change or you move to a different place, we evolve from day to day and it's really exciting. So that's why I like to find and talk to people that are adaptive in scenarios of change, who are willing to explore themselves. And it's like, I don't need to just be super rigid in my day-to-day life and who I am now. You can't change me. It's who I'm always going to be. That can feel kind of constricting at times. So you may become more like them, or maybe you're just you. Like, this could be an individual difference. Research doesn't know. I can't really speak to that.
Yeah.
Some people are very set in their ways.
Yeah.
But accepting that dynamism and that ability to evolve and I don't know, just become who you can be from year to year in your life. It is exciting.
That's cool. So I want to ask, on the flip side, breakups, what is happening? I mean, the feeling is like your heart is being carved out and like stomped on, but like, what is happening inside of us? Like, what's happening to create that feeling, and how do breakups change your identity?
Right. So I'll go back to our overlapping circles, our Venn diagram that we had. And this is an audio media format, but I'm going to do my hands because I always do. So you're like this, Venn diagrams. And then what happens when you break up is that you are no longer connected. Part of your identity has been removed. And so you might be left with a little half moon, an incomplete circle. And that lack of self-understanding and organization, all the way, like starting with the low-level things you have to do every day, who you see when you wake up, who you make meals with, who's driving around, all the way from, what does it mean to be me? Who am I going to be next year, 3 years from now? That's all just sort of blown up. And that unpredictability, even above comfort, humans love predictability. And so we will stay in situations that are uncomfortable, maybe with a person that's uncomfortable, because it's horrifying and terrifying to think we might not know what tomorrow or the next day will be like. So when we break up, we can no longer have that Venn diagram. We had those overlapping interdependence, that we, and you're just me. And when you don't know what that me is, that is super distressing. So along with missing your partner and mourning the loss of the relationship, you're mourning the loss of who you were with them. And my research focuses on that identity loss. And you're also going to want to consider things like loneliness and lack of ability to regulate emotion, because partners often help us bounce off of each other and they can help us feel better and provide comfort. So it's like you've lost the source of comfort, and also just kind of spun yourself into a whirl there, because now you have to reorganize your identity.
It's so like, there's so many pieces to it that I think people don't normally talk about. For a while, I thought that it was like, in college, there was a moment where I went to therapy for a while for like after a breakup. And I don't know that I knew anyone else who had done something like that. And I'm like, everyone should, because this is a very big deal. Because really, like, you're losing a family that felt like a family. You're losing a group of friends, maybe. You're losing an idea for your future. You're losing like half your knowledge base, where you're like, well, I didn't know how to do that because they always did that. Or there are just so many different pieces to it. And it's like, I love hearing that, because I'm like, yeah, it's a really, 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 really big deal. So
it is.
And when you're talking about like the half moon shape, like, I'm imagining all the things that people probably try to like stuff in there to sort of stop the bleeding. Like, I am just going to drink a lot, or like, I'm going to start dating somebody else, or I'm going to throw myself into this thing. Like, what happens when we do that?
So if you're looking for a quick fix, you're going to probably do what I did back when I was in college, maybe. Right. And you might rekindle the relationship, because what rekindling does is it allows you to perfectly fit back into your dyadic team, your relationship, your unit. And you don't have to really resolve that lost sense of self and those lost identities. Rebounding, while not a perfect quick fix of just putting that same shape back in there, it might not fit quite as well, but it does let you self-expand because you're taking on the identities of a new person. But your residual identity, the identity after your breakup, is still potentially incomplete if you don't take the time to fill it with things that are meaningful to you and actually resemble your identity and not that of someone else. So if you find yourself in a cyclical situation of multiple rebounding relationships, like, I don't want to stigmatize these, because they can be actually really fun and it can feel good to meet new people. But if you're in this pattern of just multiple short-term rebounds or even long-term rebounds, and you're not spending that time to figure out who you are, then what you're bringing into the next relationship is something that needs to be completed by another person. And that can be very dangerous. or just uncomfortable, I guess is a better word, psychologically, to not have that organized and secure base, foundational knowledge of you. Because then you're just a patchwork quilt of all your previous relationships, and that's kind of scary.
Tell me, like, play that out a little bit. Like, then what? I feel like we cannot have this conversation without talking about how people like their eggs. You know, like Julie, please tell me that you guys have talked about this in your research. Oh my gosh.
No.
Okay. You have to go watch Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts. Oh my goodness. Make everyone you work with watch it. She has all these relationships back to back to back. I can't remember if she's engaged to all of them, or I think she's engaged to all of them. And then, she runs away from the altar for all of them. But the thing about it is it shows her in different scenes with each partner, each fiance. And it's like, how does she like her eggs? Well, it depends on how the person that she's with likes their eggs. So you hear her say, well, I only eat my eggs scrambled, or I only eat my eggs sunny side up, or I only like whatever. And so at the very end of the movie, when she meets the person who helps her figure out who she is, he has like a whole table full of different kinds of eggs in front of her so she can try them and like actually figure out what she likes.
Oh, that's a very precious metaphor. Yeah, because you're essentially a Franken self of everyone but you. And that is just such a difficult way to operate in the world. And I think as women, we're expected to be very interdependent with people, and we're expected to always want to consider what other people want. But when you are always doing that, no matter where you go, there you are. So eventually you're going to have to sit with yourself and think about what makes you happy. And if you can't answer that question, then you can't approach that goal of fulfillment and happiness. And you're just sort of left with this aim, if the goal in our lives is to feel fulfilled, we're on this aimless journey that we don't know where we're really headed. So we can't seek partners that make us feel good, and we can't try new experiences that might add things to our lives because we're like, well, I don't really know what I want. And that's okay too. There's kind of a beauty in not being super sure about things because you can try a bunch of different stuff. But the Runaway Bride might have anxious attachment because they're entering relationship after relationship being like, well, this doesn't make me happy, but I definitely need someone else. So I'm going to jump and never pause and say, well, am I ever going to make me happy? Because people can be very permanent fixtures in our lives, but ultimately none of us are permanent and here forever. So that it requires a comfort and confidence in the self that will not come from serial relationships that are not actually fulfilling for us.
Can another person, if there's like a part of us that feels like unworthy of love, or like we're missing something, or like we don't really know who we are, or I think mostly feels like we're not good enough, or that we're unworthy of love, is that something that another person can fix for us? Or is that possible for another person's love to sort of like compensate for a lack of love for ourselves?
I'm not going to say it's never made someone feel loved, but someone can say that they love you and you can still feel unloved because they can try and give you that. But if you can't receive it and your hands are closed, it doesn't matter if theirs are open, really. Because it's a two-way street, and you have to actively receive it in order for it to be internalized. So even if someone is constantly saying, I love you, if you do not believe them or don't believe that you deserve it, if being alive isn't that, I don't, that's such a common experience. So I do think it's possible to work on that with people. If you have someone who's consistently there for you and you're trying to, go to therapy and talk about that, or you have these consistent figures, I think you can get there. It's in no way a lost cause. Our brains are so plastic, and it's beautiful. But yeah, if you're in a place where even when someone's telling you consistently that they love you and you're not able to receive it, then it's probably not going to fix you. Quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
We're not broken, but we've got some work to do.
Yeah. Yeah. So a breakup like essentially cuts out a giant chunk of our identity because we have meshed together with another person. How do we let's say first, like surviving the first phase, like the first, oh my gosh, this hurts so bad.
Yeah.
I can't believe I broke up with this person. The easiest way to fix this would be to just like plug it right back in.
Yeah.
How do we survive that to even get to the point of starting to rebuild something on our own?
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's a very physical and mental experience. At least it was for me, where our brains and our bodies are pretty connected, especially in that stress cycle. So breakup will set off this cascade of stress responses where your thoughts are stressful and your body feels either heavy or numb, or you're shaky, or people can get sick from that amount of stress. And so that turbulent time, and I've done studies. I recently collected data each week from people who have recently broken up, each week for 2 months. And the closer to breakup you are, the more turbulent and sort of volatile your thoughts and emotions are, and the more unclear your identity is. Across time, you do recover that. But when you're sitting with it, it would be great if you could try and name some of the things that you're feeling. I am a psychologist, an experimental psychologist, right? Not a clinical one, but I still look at emotion wheels because I have difficulty naming emotions at times because I just feel so much all at once and I get overwhelmed. So you can Google, emotion wheels. They actually print them on pillows. You can get a pillow and have it in your room if you're really going through it. And it's just different adjectives to describe, and you just pick one that best suits you, and that's fine. So you can name it. And once you know what it is, you can sit with that and then feel it. Because if you name it, say you're sad, and then you start blaming yourself. I shouldn't be sad they cheated on me, or I shouldn't miss them because they were a jerk. That's not helpful. I too often I'm mad at myself for feeling mad. And I'm like, well, then it's just worse. So naming it, sitting with it, which is really hard. And that's when you're going to want to do something about it. And that can go a few ways. It could be rekindling. Been there, done that. Don't necessarily recommend it. However, 1 in 3 couples currently together have broken up and gotten back together at least once. I'm not telling you to never do this. It's just that if you don't address why it happened and you just sort of are on that on again, off again, it gets messy. Mm-hmm. So while we're sitting with our emotion, we've named it, we're feeling it, we're not trying to immediately fix it. Negative emotion is a beautiful thing. Is very motivating. Even in relationships, when you have a negative emotion in a relationship, it's there, much like physical pain. Every pain we have is brain pain. If we have a physical injury and it feels painful, we attend to it. We seek help, we seek treatment. Or we notice we have a cut and we can make sure that we keep living, essentially. And then emotional pain can work in the same way. It's there to send a little signal to say, hey, something feels bad and needs fixing. And if we keep going and we don't fix it, we might not make it. And so when we're going through breakups and feeling these negative emotions, just know my brain's telling me something, my body's telling me something. Thankfully, I know what it is. I know the cause. Because if you feel that way and there's no cause, that's probably depression or anxiety, and you got to seek treatment. Mm-hmm. But knowing and appreciating that you're like, okay, my body's telling me, my brain's telling me something has happened, and I know that. And once you do that, you can start thinking out individualized maybe scenarios and situations that'll make you feel better. If you're sad, sadness requires mourning. If you're angry, usually a boundary has been broken, so you can kind of examine what boundary or norm was broken and why does it matter to me? What can I do in the future to avoid that? And also, it usually indicates pain. And again, you want to avoid cycles of rumination. Ideally, breakup is filled with all of these cyclical thoughts of like, what's wrong with the relationship? What's wrong with me? What's wrong with my partner? And that can just be really hard. But I digress. Let's bring it back. Ultimately, it kind of just feels like white knuckling it for a little while. At least in my experience, right? Where you're just like, I got to get through this. And then when you can, and when you're ready, seeking out people and scenarios that are going to support you. So people that aren't going to ask you what happened, why things, unless that's what you want to talk about it. And you seek those people out too. But what I find is that people will be like, oh my God, why are you single? Oh my God, what are you going to do now? How do you feel about this? What does this mean for the next part of your life. And that's just exhausting. So you don't have to engage with that too. So it's sort of this figuring out, approaching the good feelings and maybe avoiding, not forever, but avoiding some maybe triggering stimuli in your environment.
It's kind of surviving.
Yeah.
Surviving for a while.
Yeah.
Do you I'm glad I like how you said that it's common and it's common and sometimes works great for couples to get back together, but that just maybe not immediately. It's almost like, I don't know, don't go to the grocery store when you're hungry, or don't make decisions when you're super tired, or just sleep on it for a minute. Have you come across any sort of time frame for how long it takes for us to start to feel a little bit better or have a little bit more perspective on a breakup to kind of regain some of our sanity so we can make some decisions moving forward?
I've seen, so in the data I've collected, we see improvements in what we call self-concept clarity, which is the extent to which you're sure about your identity. So we see this upward, pretty somewhat linear trend. So a little bit better every day. And that's overgeneralizing because breakup is anything but linear. But what we do see when we look at the data is that, yes, you see, what was it? I guess it was over 2 months, across 2 months. Self-concept clarity wasn't fully back to where it was, maybe. It's kind of average levels. But, there's this rule I've heard of, and it's half the time you were together, that's how long it'll take you to get over that person. But that is not scientific at all.
I was going to say, is that scientific? I've heard that too.
No, that's from an episode of Sex and the City.
Which is, the source of some fantastic wisdom.
Yeah. But ultimately, it could also be that you were just really ready to be out of that relationship. Maybe it was a restrictive relationship, or that person was abusive, or that person was mean, and you're just like, ugh, I'm over it, and I don't need time. That's okay too.
What if you're on the flip side and it's taking you longer? I'm trying to think. I'd have to do some math here, but I feel like I was the opposite, that it wasn't half the time the relationship, it was double the relationship that it took me to get over what happened and the loss of this person, the loss of the future I imagined, the loss of who I was with them, the loss of the questions of what did I do wrong? I'm not good enough or whatever. I was I was a slow learner when it came to breakups.
As long as it needed to, and that's fine. I think it will depend on the extent to which you integrated that person into your identity and integrated them into your life. If you saw them once every other week, that's going to be quite a different experience than if you were living with that person.
Yeah.
Or if you have children with that person. I mean, breakup and divorce, they're studied differently, but the processes are happening on different scales. So the amount of interdependence or, integration of that person with you in your life, in your brain, in your emotions, that's what's probably ultimately going to best predict how long it will take. But I don't want to prescribe any amount of time. If it's impacting your daily function significantly for more than about 2 months, I would seek help. I would go talk to somebody. And we should be talking to our communities and our friends and our family, because that will provide initial comfort, and that's what they're there for. But if these things are starting to really shake your life in a fundamental way, I think that you don't want that to start to affect your mental health long term, and you don't want it to affect your physical health long term, because remaining in that stress response for that long can be bad for your heart, for your body. It's just, you want to avoid that.
That's wild. I think that is the thing that I appreciate about breakups, is that they do hurt so bad, but they do they break something open in us, and a lot of times reveal something that was already broken. And so they give us this chance to not start over, but almost fast track some growth, because you're so desperate for it. You're I need this I need to stop hurting. I need this to get better. I want to fix whatever broke this or something. And so you really take it seriously.
I Absolutely. I do love relationships for that reason. Interdependence will do that to you because you get two imperfect people, because we're all that way, and you stick them together and it's like whatever was going on before, you're bringing that to the table and it will come out. You can't suppress your neuroticism forever. You can't just, become someone who's perpetually late and just, I don't have that issue anymore. No, relationships will show you what you will need to work on. And then if that does end, if that's not something, if you weren't compatible or you were not feeling fulfilled, like it's just such a bright light flashing, and you're like, I see you and I will now address this.
Yes. So the last thing I wanted to ask you about is like, if we are going on kind of a journey of self-discovery, what are some of the things that we should be doing? Like to heal, to grow, and then also to like figure out who we are and what we want? And anything that science can help us with.
See, when we assess self-expansion in studies, in large-scale studies, I collect data from hundreds of people at a time. So I'm not doing in-person interviews necessarily. I'm looking at generally in the population, what is going on. And we'll ask questions like, did this... I will say, I will break recovery from breakup into sort of 3 avenues that you might be able to go. 2 of them are sort of similar, but I'll start with the one that's different. And the first one is immersion. And this is immersing yourself in things you used to do before the breakup and perhaps even before the relationship. So if you were really into playing the violin before you got together with this person, and then you lost that, just trying to rediscover who that person was and establishing that you have a solid base, like you are still you without your partner. Diving into those activities that may have been put to the wayside or just de-emphasized can be really fun. This other avenue is expansion, self-expansion, broadly defined though. And that's what makes it so hard, is that science can probably not tell you what exactly is going to fix you and make you feel better, because every person is unique. The relationship and the way it ended was unique. And so you'll probably need to reflect on what those things are. You can seek out things that fulfill 3 main psychological needs. We call them fundamental psychological needs. And that is autonomy, relatedness, and competence. So we need to feel like we are agentic in our lives, like we have control over what's going on, related to other people, not necessarily romantically, right? This could be friends, family, school, work, community, just being around people and feeling ultimately connected. And, what was the third one? I had
I know you just
autonomy, competence. There we go. It's only my area of study. I sometimes feel competent. Feeling that you can master the world around you, that you can do things yourself, which can be, again, hard when you've spent so much time trying to be interdependent and create a team to where you're working together, but we do still need to feel like we can do things on our own.
That I know that I know that every relationship's different, every person's different, every breakup's different. And so there isn't there isn't a prescription, but I feel like that's a pretty good, ibuprofen, drink some water, take a nap. It's like to what was the first one? Autonomy. Yeah. To practice being making some decisions, deciding what kind of eggs you like for the love, there's something really beautiful about that. And being I get to decide some things. There's something really freeing and empowering in that. And then connecting to other people, I feel like that is like the ibuprofen, it's that everyone, that is so helpful. Everybody needs that. And it helps so much. And then competence, I think that that's a lot of, anytime I'm able to do something that I didn't think I could do, my confidence grows just every single time. And so I just think I've seen that in my own life. There's something to be said for look what I did. Okay, if I can do this little thing that I kind of didn't think I could do, what else can I do? And that's really amazing.
It is. And it is transformative. And your identity will fill with all sorts of exciting things. Oh, I wanted to mention the third way. And it is kind of just self-expansion on steroids, because you can be a little bit chaotic, right? You can do things that are unpredictable that maybe you haven't done before, and that is expanding. But I mean, like, changing up low-level behaviors, like taking a different way home from work, cutting your hair. Breakup bangs are a thing for a reason. Dye it
I was
blue.
just gonna
It'll
say,
be cute.
thanks.
Or just being a little bit of a chaos gremlin in your life can be fun. And then you get to learn that you can handle change and unpredictability, and that you do have control, and that you are competent. So
Yeah.
those two kind of mush together. But beyond just like, self-expansion, kind of this like ethereal concept, but people know what chaos feels like, and you can sort of create that in your life in a way that's manageable, like microdosing chaos a little bit.
I love that phrasing. I think that's really fun. And that's a piece of advice that I think we don't ever get. Like, let yourself just like explore a little bit, like be safely a little bit irresponsible, like do, whatever that threshold and tolerance and stuff looks like for you. But I think you learn a lot that way, and you grow a lot that way, and you end up with really good stories that way. And that's a really fun prescription. I like that one.
Thank you.
Morgan, do you have just anything that you want our listeners to know before we end? Anything we didn't cover?
I think that, we got on to chat about romantic breakup, and that is my area of expertise. And I think that is a profound experience in our lives. But I also like to generalize and sort of zoom out that we are constantly breaking up with things in our lives that don't serve us. And the process and the experience can feel kind of the same, whether it be platonic friendship breakups. I have students in my lab researching friendship breakups right now. Familial, which can be sort of earth-shattering, and I know less about that from the psychological perspective. But it can also be ideological, right? You find something that is not fulfilling you, making you feel bad, harming you even, and we can be okay with breaking up with those ideas and those habits and people that, society already tells us that relationships are awesome. I don't need to tell y'all that love is great. It feels very joyous and lovely, but that in order to have good relationships, romantic, platonic, familial, and relationship with yourself and our ideologies, that we have to be willing to leave them so that we're there voluntarily. If you feel like you can't leave a relationship, that you can't actually imagine yourself being okay without them, then you're no longer an agentic person in that situation. And that can really wear on us. And I think we don't always realize when we're having that taken away. So I would just encourage people to think about that. And that people are going to tell you a lot of things about how you should be in relationships and in breakups. But only you know what's going to make you happy. And it's going to get harder probably to figure out what do I actually want, and then what do I want because I'm being told that I want it. But if we do that work of making our circle whole, I think that we can really approach understanding our own definition of our fulfillment, and that will ultimately be for our benefit.
I love everything about that. Morgan, thank you so much for coming to Girls Night. This has been so great.
Yeah, such a joy. I love talking about this stuff. And it's really, I'm ecstatic to talk to people outside of academia in my job. I spend a lot of time in my office, in my lab, but this is a very, in the grass topic where people are. So.
Well, it's so necessary, and it's so real, and it's so visceral. Like, there's something really comforting to knowing that like someone is in a lab, like doing some research and like kind of figuring out what's happening here, because when you're in it, it's just really impossible to do that. And so being able to look at this from a different perspective and like a clinical, like research-based perspective is really,
academia tries pretty hard to make it inaccessible. There's paywalls to journal articles. The language is like, is tough. But if you can, college educations are becoming much more common in the US. If you can get your hands on, you Google attachment theory and Google Scholar, or you Google something that interests you about what we've talked about, I think that people can read it. And I found so much comfort in the data. When I read the definition of attachment avoidance for the first time, I was like, oh my God. Like, I'm not really into horoscopes, but I imagine it's what it feels like to align with the horoscope. I was like,
it's me.
I see myself. And then you read these methods sections, which are supposed to be super dull and boring. But then you're like, oh, this survey talked to 1,000 people. And it turns out that, you do feel physically ill after you break up. And these 500 people tended to feel that way as well. And that is just so comforting. There's comfort in the data.
Yeah.
It's a little nerdy, but it's true.
And there's comfort in knowing that you're not alone. Like that, as you said earlier with the, like, I'm sad and I'm mad at myself for feeling sad. We do that all the time. And also part of the reason we're mad at ourselves for feeling sad is because we're like, no one else feels sad. Like, okay, no, yes, everyone else feels sad. Everyone else feels sad. So let's just get that on the table. So you're not alone. You're going to be okay. But we're not alone. I think that makes a difference.